Welcome back to another episode of Inside the Tank. This is the first episode of the new year, and you may recognize the guy sitting next to me, this way. Yes?
Yeah, I'm over here.
You know him, you love him. Please welcome back my good friend Darius Domingues. So Darius, first off, it's good to have you back on the show. I know that we were talking right before we started recording. It's been almost 3 years since we had you on last.
Yeah, it's been, first off, I just want to say thank you for having me on, and I'm a huge fan of what you guys have been doing. I don't know if you guys know how much of a reach you have. So continue to do the things you're doing, and you're doing great work. But yeah, it's been like 2.5 years, I think. The 2020 draft was a weird time. The draft is always, online, and you can watch it online. It's never in person, but it was just weird. Like some of these guys hadn't played in a few months, but yeah, here we are today.
It's just insane. And speaking of the 2020 draft, we have a lot to unpack with players that were actually in that draft that got dealt.
That's right.
So
yes,
there were quite a few trades that the Steelheads made over the last couple of weeks. I want to start off, we'll save the best for last. I want to start off with the one that they made today, and that was with the Peterborough Petes. They made two separate deals. This one was the most recent. They brought in defenseman Stevie Leskovar, which, yes, that is a buttery name. And they sent two draft picks. One, it's a 2023 fifth and a 2025 10th rounder. So I want to get your thoughts on that first.
So you fill a spot with this player that Del Mastro left. Obviously, he's not going to fill the shoes of Del Mastro because that's hard, man. That's a good defenseman, and I'm sure we'll get to that. But you fill a spot on D with Leskovar, and the assets you're giving away. I mean, you look at a 10th round pick, especially in 2 years from now. I don't think you're worried about that. A 5th round pick, you might get a player out of that, but honestly, you're filling a spot that you need for the rest of the season. So it's a good pickup here right at the last second.
No, and I agree. I mean, he's somebody who, like you said, is going to fill that spot where Del Mastro, that gaping hole in the defense where Del Mastro left. And I think that him being a good shutdown defenseman, that's what you needed as well. He may not be a guy who's going to play, for second line minutes, but he is a guy who's going to get out there and block shots whenever you need him to block shots. And he's a young player too. So you still have him for a few more years after this one, which is perfect.
It's someone you can bring in and hopefully trust. I think they're trying to get a steady defenseman out of this, right? Someone who can plug in a spot in the lineup. You have him for a few years and hopefully becomes a guy like Charlie Callahan, who, to be honest, came out of nowhere when he came on the scene. And I'm a huge Charlie Callahan fan. The way he moves the puck, the way he skates, and the role he's played for the team. So I think if you can get another player like that, you fill a spot on the team.
Exactly. And I mean, we've always seen Charlie Callahan as a guy who's super, super underrated. I always nicknamed him, the little ball of lightning, because he's so fast on the ice and he's just striking at times where you just never expect it. So a player like that would be incredible to have, especially with him moving on in his OA season. To get a player like that to fill the shoes would be incredible. Now, this one is one of the biggest deals. I think the one that kind of shook the landscape of the OHL over the last 48 hours. So this was the second deal that they made with Peterborough. So I'm going to do the Pete side of the trade tree first, I suppose, because it's real short. So I, for one, wasn't a huge fan of this move when it first got announced because, knowing Owen and learning to appreciate his game and how incredible he really is, he's an incredibly hardworking player. Owen Beck got dealt to the Peterborough Petes, but there was a huge, huge package that the Steelheads got in return. So, number one, they got 2 second-round picks in 2025, one of them belonging to Peterborough, the other one belonging to Erie. They got a 3rd rounder in 2025 and a 4th rounder in 2026, but that's not all. They also got Justin Dizzotti, who has been a very, very solid player so far. And I think the piece that I'm most excited about in Jack Van Volsen, who this past draft, I was saying that the Steelheads should go after him because he's a player that fits our system super, super well. And this one's an exciting one.
Yeah, I think let's start on the Owen Beck side. Obviously, what is there to be said? 2nd round pick of the Montreal Canadiens. He's a great player. He's a really good player, top end talent.
Borderline first round pick.
Exactly. And he probably could have went in the 1st round, honestly. There were some surprise picks last year. So he honestly could have went there. I think Montreal's got a real player in Owen Beck. He's a hardworking player for his size, especially. There's bigger players than him, but he gets the job done. And I think obviously bringing in Van Volsen, he's a guy who's skilled. He's a bigger player. He's someone that's going to be able to, fill possibly a Nathan Bastion role if we can go back a few years, right? For the team, like that power forward you can put on a top line that kind of meshes well with more of the smaller skilled guys, maybe a sniper, right? Going forward. We're not sure what the team's going to look like in a year or two at this moment, but he's definitely going to be a big piece. But it is a little bit puzzling, like you said. It's a bigger trade, obviously, and myself covering the team since 2014, which means the entire tenure of JR, James Richmond, coach and GM. He must have seen something, and obviously we'll get into the rest of the trades. He must have seen something, some type of writing on the wall to make this deal, because you're fifth in the conference. You could maybe get the fourth, but if you hang on to these guys, you're not going to have too much left over because they're all going to move on. We know that. And so if he didn't think that they really could compete with, Peterborough, Barrie, London, let's say if you get to a final, Windsor, teams like that, he must have seen something, some sort of writing on the wall to pull the trigger.
No, I agree. And I mean, it's anytime that you have a guy who plays on your roster, but you're not sure if he'll be back next year. Like I know for a fact, he was the last cut at Habs training camp. He was literally the last player cut. So he was on the brink of making the roster. That could have been that next season, he wouldn't be playing for Mississauga. So I think that it was a smart move getting him out of town to get the assets. But at the same time, that also kind of sucks because he was such a great player and he was a fan favorite to say the very least.
I think some people don't realize too, if you don't follow the OHL, that if you're not absolutely all in, if you're not in the first 3 seeds in the conference and you're not very confident in the team, you have to sell off. You have to get your assets because you will be left with nothing. We've seen it time and time again. Teams get screwed over, for lack of a better term, that they're left with no assets, and you got to restock the cupboard a little bit, right? If these guys are moving on, and if you're not going to go for it, if you're someone like the London Knights this year, for example, or it seems like every year, really,
yeah,
going back like 10 years, if you're a team like that, you're going to go, maybe to a conference final, you can go to the Memorial Cup, then maybe you keep those high end players, and you spend a little bit, go get somebody. But if you're not sure and you're maybe fifth in your conference, or, you could be fifth in the conference, but if you're not confident in your ability to get that far or to a Memorial Cup, you got to do what you got to do because it's a cycle.
Yeah. And I mean, I want to use the Ottawa 67s as an example of that. They went on that huge run in, I think it was 2019, 2018 or 2019?
It was the COVID year that got shut down. It was 1920. It looked like they were going to win.
Exactly. And just the next year, they lost everybody. Didn't trade the assets. They lost everybody, not just because the season got canceled, but they had more OAs than they knew what to do with.
Yeah. And I think, obviously with COVID, they were put in a situation that, it's tough, but obviously the trade deadline had passed. So they made their bed, right? But the next year, I don't know if they finished last, but they were near the bottom, I think.
Oh yeah, they were bottom.
They weren't a very good team.
Bottom 5.
They weren't a very good team. Yeah, not a very good team. So that's a prime example of what happens. But they were confident in themselves. The only thing is there was no playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, anything could have happened had there been playoffs, but being that there was no playoffs, kind of no point in being that confident in yourselves.
That's right.
But you're right. It all comes down to, if you're not a 1, 2, 3 seed in the conference and you're losing confidence in your team, it's this late in the season, because this is a pretty late point. It's the second half of the season just started.
Yeah.
What's the point in keeping going if you don't feel that you're confident enough to make an impact on the standings, number 1, and in the playoffs, number 2?
Exactly. And we see it we've seen it for years. The OHL is a cycle, like we've been saying, right? Like, and you just gotta make your decision. You gotta know when to pull the trigger to go for it and when to hold back and kind of reload for the next couple of years. They started the year great, I think. I thought they had a fantastic start, and that you're going to lose guys like Ballieri to the World Juniors which is one thing that nobody's talking about actually, because you got Linders, a rookie in that for the last almost month.
Yeah.
And you lose your a top end guy in Owen Beck, Del Mastro. But they started to fall, even with Luca Del Belbaluz there, James Hardy. If you didn't have the confidence in the team going forward, even with the guys coming back, then you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah, and I mean, it sucks when something like that happens, but again, you've got to do what you got to do. So, yeah. Speaking of trades that you've got to do what you've got to do, this one was a big one, and I know they broke it into 2 trades, but I'm going to count this as one big trade. So they sent Ethan Del Mastro and Luca Del Belbaluz to Sarnia in exchange for Angus McDonnell, Porter Martone, Flint's second-round pick from this year, and 2 fourths from 2025 and 2026. Now, I've heard mixed emotions on this trade, that people say that we could have got more and, that Sarnia kind of robbed us. I don't think so, because you got an impact forward in McDonnell. And then, of course, you bring in Porter Martone, who was one of the more overlooked players and one of the more talented players in this past draft. And I think that this one is going to probably turn into, hey, the Steelheads kind of made out like bandits here.
I think so, because the Steelheads, this trade is very similar to me. We'll say it's one trade.
Yeah.
Very similar to me as the Owen Tippett, Ryan McLeod trade.
That's
where
right.
It was like, they should have got more. And I feel like people were just looking at it as if they wanted to see a list of draft picks. But when you really break it down, the Steelheads are still, getting value out of that trade up until even this year, I think, right? It was a very good trade for them. So I look at it like that trade. Obviously, fantastic players going the other way. Like, nothing to be said, right? Luca Del Belbaluz, Columbus Blue Jackets prospect, and Ethan Del Mastro, one of the best defensemen I've in Steelheads history, at least, but even the OHL. Just a smart defenseman, man. I don't know what else to say, but it's a huge loss. But obviously, like we were saying, got to do what you got to do. But really good defenseman. But in return, like you were saying, Martone, another big skilled player in his first year, just drafted. You have at least 2 more years of this player.
Oh, for
right?
sure.
And then after that, you don't know. Actually, it could be 3 because of the NHL rule with prospects, right? So you have a few years out of this player, and he's only going to get better. This is his rookie year. You can't, sit there and be like, we traded Luca Del Belbaluz for a rookie. It's like, it's the value he's going to bring in the next couple of years. The Steelheads team is set up for the next 2 years. It seems so, at least.
And it's not like these guys were unproven players too. I mean, they've both, if Van Volsen, when he came in, I heard a lot of people say that, he doesn't have a whole lot of points. That doesn't necessarily determine the be all and end all. He's been an impact player in Peterborough's lineup. And then Martone, same thing. I've heard nothing but good things about him. So just because they're not putting up, 65, 70 point rookie seasons, by the way, mind you, they are rookies. They've still been players who you can rely on. They've proven themselves. So it's not like you're trading for the unknowns. You know what I mean? You're trading for guys that are going to make an impact in the lineup in the future. And that's exactly what you need.
And I think, to your point, rookies always, unless you're like Connor McDavid, rookies always have a hard time adjusting to the league. It happens. I remember Owen Tippett, I think, to bring it back to that era, had maybe 15 goals in his rookie year, and he was brought in as this elite scorer, right? And everyone's like, oh my God, he only scored 15 goals. And then you go to his draft year, and he had something like 46, right? In maybe 50 something games. So look for these guys next year. They're figuring out the league still. They're young. They're going to come into their sophomore seasons ready to go. And years after that, because you don't know where they end up, right?
Oh, for sure. And I mean, this is going to be something that you may look at this and say, you know what, these trades stink. You got rid of our star players, whatever. But I guarantee you 3 years from now, when they're in the finals in, game 4, and they're getting ready to sweep London off their feet, trust me, you're going to be happy about this. This is going to be one of those trades that just be happy. Don't complain.
Yeah, I think you have to look forward. I think you really do, because I was upset when they made when they started the quote unquote rebuild in 2019, 2018, let's say
Yeah.
that era. But they had a really good team. Like, they set themselves up for now. It didn't work out, unfortunately, this year. It looked like they were going to go for it, but they did something smart with these assets, right? It can set them up for success in a year or two. And people may be frustrated with that. But like you said, you could look 2 years down the road, you could be in an OHL final.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing about rebuilds, right? Is everybody thinks that, oh, you're rebuilding, it's going to be like a 7-8 year rebuild. First off, we're not the Leafs. And second off, it could be that it'll take a couple of years to get back into the swing of things. But as these players grow and develop, you have a great coaching staff. You got James Richmond, Jeff Krzakis, who are behind the bench. They made players like Ryan McLeod, like Michael McLeod, Owen Tippett, Nick Hague, who's playing for Vegas. They made players like that. Thomas Harley, who's playing for Dallas right now. They made players like that, and look at how impressive they were in the playoffs.
That's right. And, personally speaking, this is just me, my opinion. The coaching staff in Mississauga is like first class. Like, they have developed so many good NHLers, and some of them you haven't even seen in the NHL yet, but they will be there, and they continue to do so. Like, I have full confidence in that group. And I know that they're building a good team, and they want to build a good team for the season ticket holders, for the fans of the team. The rest of this year, it's exciting in the way that, these players are young, they have something to prove. You know what I mean? Sometimes when players get drafted to the NHL, they kind of lose this spark for the OHL, junior hockey. At times it happens. So I think with these young guys have something to prove. They're playing for something. I think it could be exciting down the stretch. You could make some noise still in the playoffs, right? So it should be exciting to watch. Maybe not go for a title, but you can, they're in 5th place. They can still squeeze into a playoff spot, make some noise. So I think that's exciting for the fans to watch going forward.
Yeah, and I'm going to agree with you on that because, again, because you're not going to be a top team in the Eastern Conference doesn't mean that playoffs are out of the question. And even if they are, the rest of the season, you'll get to see these guys and really have a good time with it. You know what I mean? Because you'll get to see them and what they bring into next season when you can really start to look at your lineup and say, okay, what can we do to build around these guys?
Exactly. You're going to they put a core together now. They're going to see what they have for the rest of the year. And then you're going to see these guys come in, these young guys next year. They're going to be even better. And you start building around them. So I think it's exciting to see what's to come. Unfortunately, I think for a lot of the fans this year, you're looking at it like, the way it started, you're like, oh, we're going to go for it this year. This is going to be a championship year. We're going to go deep. It might not, go that way, but there is something to look forward to. And there's still value in, watching these games and seeing how these guys are developing.
Yeah. And I completely agree with that 100%. And now I wanted to ask you, since these trades have been completed, the deadline was at 2:00 this afternoon. So now that it's all said and done, and this is the lineup that we're looking at for the rest of the season, and actually, funny enough, just as we're saying that, I forgot about Jake Uberti. He also got cut by the Steelheads and signed in the queue. He signed with the Acadie Bathurst Titan. So he's no longer on the roster. But as I was saying, now that all of the trades and pretty much all of the roster cuts are said and done, I wanted to get your thoughts on what this team is going to look like to you going forward for the rest of the season and possibly going into next season.
Well, first thing at hand, there is some unfinished business with some records. We know it's going to happen. It's just a matter of time because there's way too many games left in the season. But James Hardy needs 1 point and 1 goal, respectively, to break both records in Mississauga Steelheads history, which is super exciting. So if you're a fan, it's probably going to happen Friday or soon this weekend. It'll probably happen this weekend. So I think that's super exciting. But I think one thing I was really excited for in 18-19 is they traded for a couple older guys. They started this quote unquote rebuild. They traded for a couple older guys, and they had some players that they kept. And the players started to mentor the younger players that came in, right? And you're like, we might not be going for a championship, but they're teaching the guys certain things. You can see it. So I think that's really exciting going forward for the rest of this year to see how the guys who remain are going to mentor and mesh with the young guys and kind of push the young guys to take that next step, because it's almost as if, with Van Volsen, Martone, guys like that, it's almost as if you're passing the torch. Here you go, guys. This is your team now. We're still going to be here for the rest of the year. We're going to do our thing. We're going to score our goals, but here's the ropes. We're going to teach you some things. Get acclimated to the city, whatnot. So when they come in next year, they're comfortable. They start off right away. They're scoring goals, putting up points, winning games, right? So I think that it's exciting. If you're a Steelheads fan, it's okay to be disappointed that, this high-end talent is out the door, but I would still be excited personally.
Yeah, it's hard to argue with that because you made a lot of really good points. Because one of the things that this team has compared to other teams is they've got their veterans who are going to show the other guys the ropes, right? Show them what they know, pass on their knowledge, right? You look at James Hardy and Luke Misa. They've been gelling really, really, really well together. And you see shades of Hardy's game kind of rubbing off on Misa. I've seen that the last couple of games. And that's something that's really exciting because you see a guy who's got a different style of game altogether, and he's learning from him all of the stuff that he learned when he came in on his rookie season, when Owen Tippett was teaching him.
That's right.
It's all about the evolution. It's all about the evolution of the game.
And you can see some similarities between Hardy and Tippett's shot, for example. And then when you look at Misa's speed, if you add a shot to that and you pick up some tips from Hardy, that's a deadly player, man. And we see what his brother's been doing in Saginaw. So I think that could be a deadly player too. So yeah, man, it's exciting. It's exciting. You can see now the little intricacies down the stretch here into the playoffs of the older guys, or not necessarily older guys, but guys who remain on the team teaching the young guys and hopefully creating some chemistry. And between the guys who will be here next year that we know, and the young guys, let's see what they can do right down the stretch here and kind of get excited for next year too. But don't forget about the playoffs this year too.
No,
they're going to make the playoffs.
It's not completely done yet. There's still a chance that, they will, at this point, it's going to be hard to miss the playoffs. Because they're in a spot where, they're in a spot where they would have to lose like 20, 30 games to miss out. And then Sudbury would have to win. Yeah, playoffs aren't out of the question. You'll still get a little bit of experience from those guys to kind of prove themselves. Now, there was one thing that I wanted to circle back to, and that was James Hardy, a phenomenal player. One guy who soon enough is going to be known as the greatest Steelhead of all time. Because he's already the highest scoring, right? Because you look at Mikey McLeod. He had the assists, didn't have the goals. You look at Owen Tippett. He had the goals, but didn't have the assists. Hardy has both.
Yes.
The question that I have been thinking about, and I didn't actually really get the chance to think about this up until about a week ago when I was asked by one of my close friends, should the Steelheads consider retiring the number 14 a couple years down the line? I think if he
goes ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry, what was the last point there?
I got a couple of things to say about it, but I want to go to you first just to get your thoughts.
Okay. I think you have to wait some time, right? I don't know if it's necessarily because it's his OA year. He's done next year. I don't know if you could raise a banner with his number next year per se, because he is going to beat the record. We all know that. It's very obvious. He's going to be the record holder. But then by how much? Who's to say that somebody doesn't come down, in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years from now, breaks that record as well, right? You never know. So I think you would have to wait some time. I think it also depends on, how well a player does in the NHL. Right?
Yeah.
Because we've seen numbers retired in other junior cities, but it's more because of their entire hockey career. So I feel like it's definitely not out of the question, but I think we would have to wait some years. I don't know if that's a decision that would be made quickly.
Yeah, and I mean, when it comes to retiring numbers, right? Like I want to use a couple of players who have had their numbers retired: Patrick Kane in London, Steven Stamkos in Sarnia. Drew Doughty and Guelph. Those players have all went on to have successful NHL careers. And while I do think it's criminal that Hardy hasn't been drafted by an NHL team,
yes,
there is so much that I think he could kind of break that and say, you know what? just because he hasn't had a successful NHL career yet doesn't mean that you can't retire the number. I wouldn't jump to it and say, hey, the second after he leaves the team, hey, yeah, just raise his number to the banner, to the rafters. But I think this is a point where if he sets that record by the end of the season, let's say that he gets up to 225, 230, right? Right at where Riley Brace would have been. At that point, I would say, you know what, it's a given that it's either going to be the season, 2 or 3 seasons after, that number is going up in the rafters.
You make a good point, because if he does get up to maybe 230, 240, around where Riley Brace is, but it doesn't really count because he wasn't a Steelhead.
It's half and half.
Yeah. If he does get up there, that would be really difficult to break record. It would be extremely difficult. And I think as well, you mentioned, Steven Stamkos, Patrick Kane, those guys had their banners up because, of their NHL, partly because of their NHL careers as well, right? Not only, which is fantastic, right? I'm not taking anything away from that, but, a lot of people probably don't really remember their OHL career, that well. I'm not sure if, a banner will come soon. Like I said, it might be something that would have to wait a number of years, but I do think something could be in order. Like, they have a captain's mural inside the arena, at the near the front of the building, something like that, leading scorer in franchise history on the wall. Raptors 905 have some nice murals on the wall. If you can find a spot in the concourse for James Hardy, franchise's leading point getter and goal scorer, I think that is in order immediately.
Oh yeah.
I think that is something you do immediately, and I think is warranted. But in terms of retiring the number 14, having him in the rafters, I think that will have to wait some years and be determined based off his NHL career. How he fares in pro hockey.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to be regardless, it's going to be very exciting to see how far he does break the record, because of course he is going to break it. He needs one goal to take possession of both the point and the goal records. And that could come as early as Friday. So anything's possible, but it's going to be interesting to see how far he goes in terms of taking that record.
It's going to be interesting because they have something like 30 odd games left. Maybe I could be wrong. Could be up in that area. So they do have quite a ways to go. He's good for, he's going to score. He's going to score down the stretch here. The team is going to gel. I always find that teams gel more after the trade deadline, whether you've been buying or selling. So the team's going to gel a little bit more. He's going to be playing with somebody, up the middle that can give him that puck. Quite like, him and Delbo Baluz was a deadly combo. So I think it's going to be hard to match that, but I think if he can get some chemistry with somebody, he's going to put up some points. And if we're going to make predictions here live on the podcast, I would say he might finish around the 330 mark.
All right. Okay. I like the boldness.
Yes.
I like it. I definitely like it. And I think for me, it's a little bit tough to make a prediction, but I think it's probably going to be somewhere around there.
Yeah.
So
I think it's hard to predict, right?
Yeah.
It's incredibly hard, but he's going to be up there. And one thing's for sure at this time, he's not, he's tied for the record, but he will be the sole owner by end of season.
Oh, 100%. And regardless, it's going to be a fun season to watch the rest of the year. They made a few trades. They finalized their roster for the end of the season, and now we're looking into the future. Speaking of looking into the future, this was an opportunity to see this new team and what it could bring coming up in the next couple of years. So, Darius, on behalf of myself and the entire Pro Shot crew, thank you for coming on to the show today. It's been an honor and a privilege having you as always, and we're definitely going to have you back on at some point during the season before the draft.
Thank you, Tyler. I really appreciate it. And like I said at the beginning, the podcast is fantastic, and all the work you guys do, all the stuff you put out. Like I said, I don't know if you guys know how much of a reach you have. So continue to do what you're doing and pushing forward. It's really good stuff. And thank you for having me on again. It's been an honor.
And that really does mean a lot. Thank you so much. So if you haven't already done so, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, hit the little bell notification for all future content. And if you feel so inclined, our social medias will be linked down in the description below. And I will also link Darius's social media down below so you can follow him.